Today we're going to talk about the Nvidia RTX 3080 Ti. Should you buy it? There are a couple of very important things you should know: how it compares, the actual performance, and the availability and pricing. Let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago here with Classical Technology. Remember to subscribe and smash that like button. Today, let's talk about a very unique GPU, which is the 3080 Ti. I say unique because it kind of slots in right between the RTX 3080 and the 3090, and it has some attributes that are very unique to it. Now, if you're not aware, the 3080 Ti is the latest GPU to be released from Nvidia. The 3080 and the 3090 came out around this time about a year ago. Now, one of the main differences between these GPUs, and a lot of times they perform very similarly in gaming, you're going to have things like light hash rate, you're going to have things to do with the pricing and availability, so there's definitely a lot for us to discuss. So first, the first item that we're going to talk about right off the bat, and the reason why you may find it in stock, that's going to be the light hash rate moniker. That basically means that this GPU, when compared to something like a 3090, will not perform in cryptocurrency mining like it should, given its power, compared to something like a 3080 from last year or the 3090. Now, Nvidia specifically did this to sort of dissuade miners from buying this GPU, and the idea here is that they would be left on the shelves for a gamer to pick up because the gaming performance is not affected at all. We're going to talk a little bit more about performance as well as it compares to the other GPUs surrounding it, but that's something that you should know. The light hash rate really affects only the cryptocurrency mining. The idea here is the power draw and sort of the hash rate that you get is not really going to be very appealing enough to miners to use this GPU. But of course, like with everything else, there certainly is a caveat. They have been trying to unlock more mining performance from this GPU, so it does do maybe 75% now instead of just 50% previously, with a little bit less power draw. So they are trying to sort of crack it, if you will, but as it stands now, it still pales in comparison to what you can get out of like a 3070 or 3080 or 3090, which are non-light hash rate. And another note, the 3090 is the only one of the more recent GPUs that kept the non-LHR distinction. I guess because it's a more expensive GPU, they didn't really bother with it at all, but everything else coming out now, including the 3080 Ti, 3080, and 3070, they're all going to be LHR. Now, this doesn't matter if you just want to use it for gaming, but if you wanted to use it for a dual purpose, that's certainly something to keep in mind if you're considering picking up a 3080 Ti. And now the second important item that we will discuss, and this is also very much connected with it being LHR, is going to be the pricing and availability. Now, in terms of pricing, if you look at the original MSRP pricing, this GPU is certainly pretty expensive. The Founders Edition is about $1199 compared to $699 for the 3080. But as the market is pretty much upside down on its head, we can't go by these original MSRPs to indicate any type of a reference for what they perform like in the market. You're much more likely to find a 3080 Ti, such as the EVGA for the Win 3, for a price like $1399, which is the MSRP if you go from EVGA directly or even Micro Center. Now, that's not really a terrible price considering the market, because most 3080s on the secondhand scalper market are pretty much right now around that price. They originally should have been $699, maybe some of the beefier third-party models maybe around $800 or $900, but most of them are well into like the low thousands, and on the secondhand market they're $1,500, and as we saw in May, they reached a staggering $2,000 for an original 3080. So if you consider the $1399 price of the 3080 Ti, definitely seems to be fairly reasonable for the EVGA GPU. Now, remember that the 3090 came priced at $1499 for the Founders Edition, and the other models initially were somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000. Now, most of them, something like an MSI 3090, seems to be like $2,100 to $2,200. Some EVGA 3090s, if you're lucky to get one of those, can still be found for a little bit under $2,000, but then you have to ask yourself, itself, the price difference between a 3080 Ti and a 3090, it's $1399 versus almost $2,000. So often you'll have at least a $500 to maybe $800 difference between a 3080 Ti and a 3090. And if you're not going to use it for mining, you just want it for gaming, it's pretty much a no-brainer that the 3080 Ti would work well in this scenario. And if we consider the price of the 3080 being so high right now, because it's still very appealing for mining unless it's a non-LHR GPU, it also makes sense to do the 3080 Ti over that GPU because the prices are going to be very similar sort of out there in the real world market. And the 3080 Ti, as we're going to talk about now for the third point, the performance is pretty much like a 3090 in terms of games, and of course it's going to be superior pretty much all of the time than the 3080. So if you're talking about purely for gaming, let's say you pay $1399 for the 3080 Ti, you're much better off than spending $700 or $800 more for a 3090. Performance wise, the only thing you're going to get extra in that much more expensive GPU is going to be 24 gigabytes of VRAM compared to about half 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which is also superior to the 3080's, paltry 10 gigabyte of VRAM. Some games do take advantage, like Flight Simulator 2020, if you're really pushing that game. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. But overall, gaming performance of the 3080 Ti is within a few percentage points of the 3090. Sometimes it even equals or beats it, but the price difference is certainly very massive. So if you're looking for performance in gaming, absolutely no-brainer to buy the 3080 Ti. And as we mentioned before, the 3080 Ti will outperform the 3080, and since their pricing is so close, with maybe a 3080 Ti edging out slightly a 3080 in certain times, I still think it's a no-brainer to go for the 3080 Ti if your main use case is gaming. Of course, if you wanted to mine with the GPU, definitely not going to be the best idea. Then it's better to go with the 3090 or find a non-light hash rate GPU if that's what your particular use case is going to be. Now, another couple things that we do have to keep in mind about the 3080 Ti, even though it's limited with the light hash rate limit and it has other attributes like the less amount of VRAM, only 12 versus 24 gigabytes of VRAM, it's still a very power hungry and definitely hot running GPU. I actually have one right behind me here that I'm testing, and when you're playing games on it, and it's going like full max power, it certainly heats everything up pretty nicely. It has pretty much close to what a 3090 would put out in terms of its power and everything else. So if you're looking at it in terms of the thermals and power and noise, certainly not going to be the most efficient GPU ever. I mean, if you have a 3090 and it's putting out this much heat and power, if you're gaming, it doesn't make that much of a difference because, like I said, they're extremely close. For things like crypto mining, that's where it's really going to be efficiency and make a huge difference. So you further understand sort of the gap between 3080 Ti's as well as the 3090. But otherwise, it's a great GPU, performs really well, and as long as you have a good cooler like the EVGA 4013, and even that runs pretty hot, you should mostly be okay in like a nicely well ventilated case. With any of these higher performing GPUs, from the 3080 to the Ti to the 3090, you definitely are going to need, if you're not water cooling it, you're going to need some pretty nice airflow in your case, because all three certainly get very hot. And remember, if you get the Founders Edition, the 3080 Ti has very similar cooler to the 3080. It's not big and beefy like the 3090, and like we mentioned before, it runs almost just as hot and draws as much power. So that's going to be a concern. It's a GPU that the fans are going to ramp up much more in that Founders Edition cooler. Not to mention that the Founders Edition coolers have had some issues with badly applied thermal pads from the factory, so I would definitely keep an eye on that. They're fantastic GPUs to water cool when you're using the Founders Edition, but if you want to run them stock and if you want to do some rendering or mining or anything that's going to really use that VRAM, would advise to get a third-party partner card instead, like MSI, ASUS, or EVGA. Those typically are going to have much better control of the VRAM, better thermal pads, and you won't have to deal with the issues that you will with some of these Founder Edition models. So to conclude, is the 3080 Ti worth it for your money? I think, given that it's popping up more frequently than other GPUs now, especially considering versus the 3080, which is pretty much impossible to find, and the 3090, which does come in stock occasionally compared to the other GPUs, has a really big price price delta for the performance that you're getting versus the 3080 Ti, I think the 3080 Ti is definitely worth it if you want pretty much one of the best high-end GPUs for gaming. Just keep in mind it's going to run a little hot, it's going to draw a lot of power, it's probably going to have a big cooler, so you need a nice big case with airflow going through it so you don't overheat or have a lot of noise issues and things like that. Otherwise, even though it's expensive, MSRP $1399, we would have loved to see this closer to like that $999 limit. It's sort of what the market is now. What are you going to do about it? I mean, either you buy something like that at the MSRP with those small minor limitations that it has, like the LHR, or you go in the secondhand market and you're going to pay a pretty handsome penny for a 3080 or pay a lot more for a 3090, which if you're just gaming has really minimal performance gains over the 3080 Ti. Now, in terms of resale value down the line, who's to say which one is going to be worth more? Of course, if there is a GPU price crash and prices sort of normalize and come back down to normal, definitely I think the 3090s will probably crash the hardest because its prices are so high. Things like the 3070, 3080, 3060 Ti are always going to be more desirable first for more of the population just due to their price point, and most gamers don't need the overkill RTX 3090, so that's certainly going to come down in price a considerable amount, while the 3080 Ti with its slightly upgraded VRAM over the 3080 at 12 gigabytes may prove to just have a better value long term. This is going to be for gaming independent of what happens with mining and things of that nature. If the cryptocurrency boom continues and they do unlock more LHR performance from this particular GPU, that's going to be something to keep in mind because the value may stay high and these may become even harder to find in the future. Right now, what's sort of saving them is that they're really not the most appealing GPUs for mining because of LHR, and we have had a little bit better stock and availability across the board with certain GPUs. Now, a quick comparison over on the AMD side, you could certainly take a look at a nice 6800 XT or a 6900 XT. For gaming, they're going to be pretty comparable to a 3080 Ti for the most part. There are some cases where Nvidia certainly will have a lead in some technologies like in ray tracing in the DLSS. AMD certainly is going to be implementing a lot of that as well. So depending on the price that you find a 6800 XT, if it's close to a 3080 Ti, I would still prefer the 3080 Ti, but if you can find it much closer in price to maybe like $1,000 or $1,100, whichever model that you're looking for, that's certainly then going to be a good buy. And of course, with its original MSRP of under $700, the 6800 XT would certainly win out in price to performance in my book versus a $1,200 3080 Ti at almost twice the price. But unfortunately, the 6800 XTs are pretty close in price, above over the $1,000 limit, and the 6900 XTs seem to hover between $1,400 to $1,700, and some models being even more expensive. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. If you can't find an Nvidia GPU, take a look at these AMD GPUs as well. They can provide pretty comparable performance, but unfortunately, you're not going to be saving too much money at this point in time. They will be definitely a lot more efficient in terms of their power draw, though, as a 3080 Ti certainly does draw a considerable more amount of power than something like a 6800 XT. Alright guys, so let me know what you think down below. Do you think the 3080 Ti is a buy? I think if you're a gamer, it's definitely a pretty decent GPU to buy if you're in that high-end market and it fits your budget. It's one of the only real options that sort of come in stock now. Unfortunately, you can't get a 3080, and a 3090 I think is just a little bit too expensive for gaming compared to it. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you agree. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.